I spend a lot of time on this channel looking at specific things inside of narrative theory, how to tell a story, how to write great books. All of these things are extremely important as you build up your skills as a writer, but sometimes I want to take these ideas and just go to a masterwork, go to some writing, and look at how they're showing up out in the real world. So that's what we're going to do on today's video. Is we're going to zoom in on A Wrinkle in Time. We're going to look at the first scene in this book, and we're going to go through the 5 commandments, the objects of desire, and we're going to look at specific ways these concepts show up in the writing. Now, my name is Tim Grahl. I'm the CEO of StoryGrid, where we help you build the skills, write a book, and leave your legacy. My partner is Sean Coyne. He's the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and everything we teach here on this channel is from his extensive experience as a writer and editor over 30 years. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at this very first scene from the book A Wrinkle in Time. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to reference several different things like the 5 commandments of storytelling, objects of desire, and other things. If you want to dig into any of those concepts, I have videos teaching them linked down in the description of this particular video. This is the first scene in A Wrinkle in Time. Now, as you notice, though, it's just one piece of the first chapter. So when we look at a scene, we're looking at when something changes, when the full 5 commandments has happened within the writing. And so the first chapter of A Wrinkle in Time actually holds 3 different scenes, and we're just going to look at the first one. The first thing we're going to look at is the 5 commandments of storytelling and how they show up in this particular scene. The first commandment is the inciting incident, and the inciting incident is the thing that knocks the protagonist's life off of balance. In this particular scene, it is the storm. So technically, it happens off the page because we get dropped into the story and the storm has already been happening, but we get it in this first line. It was a dark and stormy night. And so we already know it's nighttime and there's a storm, and this is our inciting incident. This is what's going to knock Margaret's life off balance. Now, the inciting incident gives rise to our protagonist's object of desire. Because our protagonist's life is knocked off balance, it creates a want. It creates something that our protagonist wants. Now, it can be a good thing, like a job offer or a love interest, but most of the time, and in this particular scene, something bad has happened and it knocked our protagonist's life off balance, and they want to get back to the way things were before the inciting incident. So before the inciting incident, before there was a storm, Margaret wasn't scared, and now she is scared. And we see that first of all show up right here. So this is where the object of desire shows up, and the object of desire is that Meg is afraid and she doesn't want to be afraid anymore. And we see that when she shakes right here because of the storm. The first commandment is the inciting incident. The next commandment is progressive complications that lead to a turning point. So a progressive complication is when the protagonist is pursuing their object of desire and then they can't actually get it. When something gets in its way, then we progressively complicate the scene. The first thing Madeleine L'Engle does is she gets in some backstory here. So from here all the way down to here, we mainly get some information about who Meg is. So we hear a little bit about her day, how the teachers interact with her, a fight she got in, that her father is missing, and all of this gets put in here by the author. And then we come back into the scene and we see the window rattled madly in the wind, and she pulled the quilt close about her. Curled up on one of her pillows, a gray fluff of kitten yawned, showing its pink tongue, tucked its head under again, and went back to sleep. And this is where we start seeing the next progressive complication, which is that everybody was asleep. So not only is she up and she's afraid, but she can't really go to anybody to get comfort because everybody was asleep. So this is a progressive complication. So normally she would rely on her little brother coming up and comforting her, but he hasn't shown up. And then her mind starts running away again. She starts thinking about the radio with the hurricane warnings. She starts thinking about the roof getting blown away and her being just tossed out into the wild night sky, and her shivering grew uncontrollably. So this is another progressive complication, because at this point, it's not getting any better. We started with her shaking, and now she's shaking uncontrollably, so it's getting worse. In this next line, we get to know a little bit more about Meg, that she asked to have the attic bedroom, and that she's the oldest, and this is a privilege, not a punishment. So this line right here gives us a clue, along with some of this backstory, as to why she doesn't just ask for help, go to her mom's room, wake somebody up, because she sees it as her responsibility to be the older one and not be afraid. And it is this that creates the tension in the scene, is this pull between her wanting to feel safe and her getting more and more scared, while at the same time not wanting to be seen as weak and wanting to be able to take care of herself. And again, this is nodded to up here, where she got into the fight instead of letting her brothers take care of it for her. The next progressive complication is when her dog starts barking. So now she's alone in her room, she's getting more and more scared, and then she starts hearing the dog bark. And the dog never barked without a reason. So this is another progressive complication that continues to make her more afraid. So the next thing that happens that progressively complicates is she remembers overhearing that there was a tramp in town that had stole 12 sheets from Mrs. Buncombe, the constable's wife. And this gets her thinking that maybe that tramp has come to the house and maybe that's what the dog is barking at. So she decides to leave her little room and go downstairs and check on everybody. So she goes through everybody's rooms. They're all still asleep, sleeping soundly, which she does not understand. And at this point, the dog had stopped barking, which made her feel a little bit safer, because then it wasn't the tramp coming in the house, because there's no way he would stop barking. But then she starts thinking again, what if the tramp does come? Suppose he has a knife. Nobody lives near enough to hear if we screamed and screamed and screamed. Nobody will care anyhow. The turning point of the scene comes when our protagonist realizes they're not going to be able to go back to the way things were before the inciting incident. So in this particular scene, we see that Meg is going to stay afraid. She has just realized this is not going away. She's going to stay afraid. So what is she going to do? Is she going to go back up to her room, or is she going to stay down in the house where she feels safer? Which leads to our climax, where she decides, I'll make myself some cocoa. So this is the climax. The climax is the decision that the protagonist makes. That is the fourth commandment. The third commandment is the crisis. So the crisis in this case is, does Meg go back up to her room or stay downstairs? And then, of course, the climax is, I'll make myself some cocoa, she decided, and she decides to stay downstairs. Now, the resolution is what happens as a result of the decision that our protagonist has made. And so in this scene, we see Meg make a decision to stay downstairs, and then as a result, she finds her brother sitting in the kitchen and he's been waiting on her. So here's what I want you to see, is that the inciting incident of the storm is what kicks off our scene. It's what knocks Margaret Murray's life off of balance. And the way that it knocks her life off of balance is that it makes her afraid. Now, what this means is that it gives rise to this object of desire, is she doesn't want to be afraid anymore. Now, the other character in this scene is the storm. Obviously, it's not an actual character, but what's creating the tension is the storm. If right now the storm went away, it was no longer loud, there was no more lightning, and it calmed down, Meg would go right back to sleep and it would be right back to the way it was before the storm came along. But because the storm keeps rocking the house and making all of this noise, it gets Meg afraid, and then her mind starts running away from her. So she first would love to be comforted by her brother or another family member, but everybody is asleep, which makes her more afraid. And then she starts hearing the dog bark, which gets her mind racing. Who has this not happened to? We've all heard that sound in the night and start imagining big, horrible things. And the dog barking reminds her of what she heard about a tramp being in town. And that gets her even more afraid. That gets her up out of bed, walking downstairs to check on her family. And then the dog stops barking, but now her mind is thinking about this tramp coming. And this is what just pushes her to the point where she realizes she's not just going to be able to go back to sleep. She's not going to be able to calm down. And so she decides to go make herself some cocoa and stay downstairs instead of go back up to her room. And the result of that decision is she actually gets what she wants. Since her brother is waiting for her, she's no longer alone, and she feels safer because she is now with her brother. So the main thing I want you to see is how the objects of desire comes out of the inciting incident, and that is what the protagonist is actively pursuing for the rest of the scene. They're trying to get back to the way things were before the inciting incident. And each thing that they try doesn't work, and it pushes them to a crisis point where they have to make a decision. Then we see them make the decision, and then we see what happens as a result of that decision. I love this start to A Wrinkle in Time. I think it's perfect for a children's book because every child has laid awake at night scared of a storm. So we know exactly what that feels like. And we get to see Meg deal with that in all her own ways, and all the way down to the point where she just goes downstairs and decides to make some cocoa so that she doesn't feel as afraid. And then she gets the relief of finding her brother there, so she's no longer alone with the storm. I also want to point out how the author got us information about Meg without directly telling us. So how do we know that Meg is somebody that tries to do things by herself and doesn't like to ask for help? The author didn't just say, Meg is one of those people that likes to do things herself and not ask for help. Instead, she showed us that by giving us just a little backstory of something that happened that day. And we see that right here. And on the way home from school, walking up the road with her arm full of books, one of the boys had said something about her dumb baby brother. At this, she'd thrown the books on the side of the road and tackled him with every ounce of strength she had, and arrived home with her blouse torn and a big bruise under one eye. Sandy and Denny's, her 10-year-old twin brothers, who got home from school an hour earlier than she did, were disgusted. Let us do the fighting when it's necessary, they told her. So we see right here not only the love for her brother, which comes out later in the scene and in the scenes that follow, but we also see that she's somebody that likes to take care of problems herself, which again is why she doesn't just get up and go downstairs and wake up her brother or wake up her mother to comfort her. She feels like she has to take care of herself. Other things set up in this are her father missing, again, her love for her brother, the way the house is laid out. All of this comes into play later in the book, and it's getting set up really nicely in this early scene. So again, this is a perfectly crafted scene in this masterwork, where in just about 1,200 words, we get a lot of backstory. We know a ton about our protagonist, and we get all 5 commandments in here that lead the story and push the story forward to get Meg downstairs and in the kitchen where her brother, where the story can continue to progress. I love A Wrinkle in Time. This is a fantastic book. I remember reading it as a kid and again as an adult. And what I want you to see by how I've broken down this particular scene is this is a way to get to know your own masterworks of taking a scene inside of the books that you love, looking for the 5 commandments, identifying the objects of desire of the characters, and seeing how the scene progresses based on these 5 commandments and the objects of desire and the tension that comes from those within a particular scene. So if you love A Wrinkle in Time, I recommend continuing to go through it, identifying the 5 commandments of storytelling, the objects of desire, and how the book progresses from the beginning through all the way to the end. If you want to dig more into these ideas of the 5 commandments, objects of desire, and other writing tips, make sure you check out the description. I put lots of links in there. And make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you don't miss any other videos that I put out here on the channel. As always, if you want more from StoryGrid, go to storygrid.com. We got lots of great resources. You can also sign up to get a free one-on-one consultation with a StoryGrid expert. So if you're stuck with your writing and need a little help of what to work on next, feel free to create a call with us. We'd love to talk to you. But either way, thanks so much for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.